And now, the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gaston Alphonso Browne, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Corporate Governance, and Public-Private Partnerships of Antigua and Barbuda. I request the protocol to accompany His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Secretary General, Excellencies, Antigua and Barbuda speaks as a small microstate on the front line of the climate crisis, exposed to grave shocks and with restricted access to affordable financing. The fact that my country's economy is among the fastest growing in the Caribbean and enjoys a high level of human development, it owes little to the global financial system, and even less to the global effort to curb climate change. While there have been some benefits, neither have helped to achieve the transformation that they promoted. Yet, my people know that a brutal hurricane could destroy the progress that they have achieved in just a few agonizing hours. We have lived this reality before. Each year, we fear we may live it again. Therefore, while my small country readily agrees that the nations of this world would be better together, as this year's theme proclaims, we must also remind this Assembly that 80 years after the Charter, better together remains an aspiration, devoutly to be wished and yet to be achieved. Madam President, our world is at an inflection point. A retreat from multilateralism, from the tenets of international law, and from respect for human rights and freedoms warns us that we have reached a pivotal point. The conflicts we witness, the disregard for human life, the refusal to lay down arms and engage in dialogue, the disrespect, neglect of the poor, the small and vulnerable, these trends sketch a dystopian future, more divided than together. This, then, is precisely the moment to resummon all nations to the purposes and principles of the Charter set down 80 years ago. Without international cooperation, universal peace will not be achieved. What humanity needs at this time is not only peace, but compassion, solidarity, justice, and love reigning in our hearts. The climate crisis is not a weather forecast, certainly not for small island states. It is our daily plight. Shores retreat, reefs bleach, storms intensify, while droughts destroy our crops and animals. This is not fate. Science has proven that it is the product of sustained high emissions which imperil small states and also damage the environment, economies, and health of the very nations that produce them. And that's the irony. Climate change science is not fraudulent, and we ignore it to our own peril. Madam President, we support a just, orderly energy transition, a transition that caps, then fairly phases down and ultimately phases out the fossil fuels that drive this destruction without sacrificing energy security or development. We favor a fair carbon levy on the heaviest emitters, public and private, with proceeds directed to adaptation, loss and damage, and resilience. The Loss and Damage Fund must operate as promised. Predictable, front-loaded financing that arrives when disaster strikes, disbursed timely on objective triggers so that help comes at the speed of need. But finance must be fair before a storm hits. Right now, the inequitable international financial system makes the most vulnerable countries pay the highest price just to protect themselves. These climate disasters force us to borrow expensively to rebuild. Consequently, debt swells and resilience stalls. We call yet again for full adoption of the multidimensional vulnerability index across international financial institutions so that exposure to shocks opens access to concessional terms. Lending should match climate horizons, long repayment periods, low fixed rates, sensible grace periods, and climate-resilient debt clauses that automatically pause payments after verified shocks. Local currency lending windows would end the foreign exchange penalty that deepens debt without adding value. That at least would be a step along the road to justice. Madam President, for islands like mine, the ocean is not scenery. It is the source of food and jobs and the opportunity for new chances of growth and development. But it must be protected. We urge decisive action against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, plastics that choke reefs, and pollution that steals mangroves. As custodians of vast exclusive economic zones, small islands offer partnership and stewardship. Let us back robust global plastics and fossil fuel non-proliferation treaties. Expand blue carbon finance for mangroves and seagrass, and make maritime domain awareness and the provision of satellite and data sharing services standard support for SIDS. Until independent science proves no serious harm, we support a moratorium on seabed mining. No one should mortgage the ocean to pay, or the ocean floor to pay for short-term bills. Madam President, law must be our guardrail. Consequently, Antigua and Barbuda and Vanuatu have sought and successfully obtained from ITLAS and ICJ legal clarity on climate obligations. Legal advisory opinions now define duties of states to prevent harm and protect the most vulnerable. If major emitters will not cut greenhouse gas emissions in line with science, victim states must retain the right to pursue legal remedies consistent with international law for climate harm. And I want to make the point here that this is not hostility. It is the logic of the law. It is justice. Antigua and Barbuda supports UN reforms to include the participation of small island states having a regular, structured voice in Security Council deliberations and climate-related security risk. Excellencies, last year the world came to Antigua for the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States and adopted the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, the ABAS, a 10-year contract for resilient prosperity. We launched the SIDS Center of Excellence on Antigua with a global SIDS data hub to turn promises into projects, better data, more investments, and the achievement of debt sustainability. Those who invoke partnership should help fund and implement it. If better together means anything, it means delivering where need is greatest and fiscal space narrowest. Small states are not asking for charity. Let me make that abundantly clear. We ask for equity, for finance that fits risk, for peace grounded in law, for rights that protect the vulnerable. We are seeking the chance to protect our lives and preserve our livelihoods. In a similar vein, Madam President, we assert that justice cannot be complete without addressing historic injustices. In the Caribbean, the stain of colonialism, slavery, and native genocide is still branded in the legacies we were left. The transatlantic slave trade was and still is the most heinous crime committed against humanity. We seek reparatory justice from those who committed those atrocities, who kept our forebears in physical chains and mental slavery for hundreds of years. Colonialism and slavery have imposed the rigid trade routes with which we now live, the underdevelopment from which we are seeking to rise up, the constraints that make us suppliers and not producers. Reparatory justice is not charity. It is principled restitution for wealth extracted, for unpaid labor, barbaric killings, and physical abuse endured by our forebears. We invite partners to engage this agenda in good faith as part of building a fairer global economy for all. Madam President, in the Middle East, we insist that Israeli hostages be released by Hamas. And I said here that civilians must not be pawns in any conflict. At the same time, we condemn the forced removal of people in Gaza from their homeland and the genocide that has occurred there. Humanitarian access must be guaranteed and the protection of civilians made non-negotiable. Antigua and Barbuda maintains its position in favor of a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in security and dignity, consistent with the United Nations resolutions. We regret that the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization was denied a visa to attend this assembly in person. While we welcome the Assembly's decision to allow him to address this session by video, we remind everyone that the United Nations is, above all, a chamber for voices to be heard, not to be muzzled, especially during times of war and conflict. Shutting out voices does not shut down underlying issues. Similarly, in Europe, the war in Ukraine must end in peace and with justice, not in the battle fatigue of the besieged. We urge a return to diplomacy anchored in the Charter and call on all states to refrain from actions that prolong conflict or profit from it. Peace with law is the only peace that lasts. Madam President, I now come to Haiti. This beleaguered country demands sustained attention, not cycles of improvisation or improvisation. Funding has arrived in fits and starts while suffering has grown. We support a single Haitian-led plan, executed under a single Security Council mandate and financed through a single transparent Haiti fund, aligning the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the Caribbean community behind one budgeted program with public accountability. Disbursements should follow results such as roads retaken from gang control, extortion stopped, arms and illicit finance interdicted, civilians protected, and essential services restored. Haiti needs one mandate, one Haitian-led plan, one fund, accountable and transparent. We urge every member of the Security Council to support the proposed resolution on increased security assistance for Haiti that is now before it. Action is long overdue. The Council must act to help Haiti and its long-suffering people. Madam President, we also address the conduct of counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean Sea. Without judging facts not before us, including reports of lethal incidents off the coast of Venezuela, we restate a simple principle. The fight against drug trafficking must rest on cooperation and law. Interdictions should proceed under clear legal authority and rules of engagement that minimize risk to life, respect for sovereignty and the law of the sea, and prompt information sharing and review. Whereas Antigua and Barbuda stands ready to work with all partners against traffickers, we are concerned with the buildup of military assets, including a nuclear submarine indicating the possibility of military conflict. We remind everyone that our hemisphere should be respected as a zone of peace, not a theater of military conflict. Madam President, we also address Cuba. For more than 6 decades, the Cuban people have lived under a suffocating trade embargo And Cuba remains listed by one country as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, we all know that that classification is a hoax. It is in our hemisphere's interests to move towards normalized relations consistent with sovereign equality. Normalization is not a concession. It is a pathway to dialogue and to fashioning a way forward that ensures regional stability through negotiated, binding agreements. Now, Madam President, I come to the issue of public health that affects every family everywhere in the world. More than 1 billion people are now living with mental health conditions. Yet, median government spending remains at about 2% of health budgets. Treatment gaps are widest in low and middle-income countries, fueling a growing mental health epidemic among them. Suicide claims nearly 1 million lives each year. It is among the leading causes of death for young people. Last June, when Antigua and Barbuda hosted the OAS General Assembly, we secured a hemispheric resolution on improving mental health in the Americas with practical steps on national plans, community-based services, priority in coverage, workforce development, and digital access. Mental health is not a curse. It is a solvable challenge. Now let me remind us all, mental health is a human right. Sanity is the people's right. When we invest in mental health, people recover and re-enter community and work. As a consequence, countries rise. Antigua and Barbuda is committed to working on a United Nations resolution treating mental health as essential to development. The other issue that I'd like to address is non-communicable diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, and various forms of cancer. They account for 75% of all deaths in the Caribbean. They are the most significant cause of death globally, creating a silent global health crisis. We need to urgently address this crisis with the same urgency of infectious diseases. Madam President, what we set out here is the minimum needed to honor the Charter at 80. The storms are stronger, the deaths are heavier, inequity is wider, yet the remedies have not changed, and they certainly need to change. Let us pursue a new sustaining dispensation of rules over power and might, fairness over advantage, and people over profit in the interests of humanity. Madam President, Excellencies, if this world is truly better together, let us be accountable together and be accountable to all, not only to a few nations, but to all nations, not only to the present generation, but also to the generations that follow, not only to those who wield power, but to those against whom power is wielded. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. Blessings.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Corporate Governance, and Public-Private Partnerships of Antigua and Barbuda.